I'm still amazed at how resourceful Trevor is mid-combat. Welcome to the in-depth spoiler review of Netflix's Castlevania. If you're new to the series and haven't seen it, then click on my spoiler-free review to see if it's worth watching. Otherwise, stick around, pull out a stopwatch, and grab your favorite holy water drink, because we're going to be axing the question whether Castlevania is a knife-quality series worth watching. I really hope that none of you are crossed by my puns. You still there? Hey, this is quality content I'm making, alright? Anyways, reiterating my previous video, my experience with Castlevania games are limited to this, and this. But I have enough experience between the two mediums that I can safely say Netflix's Castlevania is a smashing, excellent show that pays respect and plenty of homages to the game series while being a separate entity with its own canon. Now, let's get started with the review. We'll talk about Season 4 soon, but I want to build up to it, including the divided controversy for Season 3. Season 1 and 2 were stellar starting points, and it was the simplest in terms of plot, and established the wonderful characters that we all know and love. They had great banter and wit, and really tugged at my emotions. Trevor and Sifa are a hilarious and likable duo. Trevor is a fantastic drunk and an excellent fighter with a sprinkle of gallows humor. But in my opinion, he's also very realistic, and everything he says isn't out of place too. And he probably has the most snarky video game scene of all, finding a weapon upgrade in the wall, just like in the game. The only way it could be more snarky is if he whacked a candle and the upgrade popped out instead. Sifa is a really cool character, and she's more than capable of taking care of herself, propelling the plot forward with her runic knowledge, and definitely hard carrying some very difficult battles. She's humorous and definitely rubs off on Trevor over time, and has witty, great lines. It's fantastic seeing them together too, since they have kind of like a cool stellar combo attacks whenever they tag team each other. What about the Forge Masters Hector and Isaac? I think they're fantastic characters that goes on a spiritual journey for themselves. In fact, I think Isaac actually has the most developed plotline of all. For Seasons 1 and 2, we have great setup as we learn about their backstories. They have serious, thoughtful interactions with Dracula and Carmilla, and regarding specifics about them, Isaac is definitely the more stubborn of the two. And that stubbornness is what led him to become unswayed by Carmilla, and also willing to sacrifice himself for Dracula. It's an establishment of his character. And yeah, it's kind of interesting, creepy, and with his little, zealous, demented self-flagellation. Hector, on the other hand, is kinder but more naive. He sees humanity as a problem but doesn't want them to be eradicated, only controlled. And this naiveness is ironically what led him to be deceived by Carmilla. Everything he does is established as wanting the best for people but getting manipulated. And I think he's a pretty solid character overall. Speaking of Carmilla, she's crazy, okay? She be crazy, like in a good writing way. She has enough mystery surrounding her that entices me, yet she reveals just enough to show how insane and violent and cunning she is. For example, she toys with Hector's ego, saying how great he is, only to, betray him in a very, very, very violent way at the end. She's frightening and regal, and at the end sets up everything to be the big bad boss upon Dracula's defeat. And Dracula. Dracula is a solid villain. Yes, he was written way differently compared to his game counterpart. But you know what? I like this version of Dracula compared to the games. He isn't just an evil dude with an army wanting to kill all of humanity. The show gave him a more emotional side and strong attachments to Lisa. So much that Lisa's death was the reason he became insane. And the cool thing is the show doesn't directly show deterioration of his mind. Oftentimes we learn of Dracula's descent to insanity and love for Lisa through his interactions with his vampire generals and his Forge Masters. It gives us reasons for his generals to consider rebellion because they suspect him to be insane, while at the same time he's kind of bonding with his Forge Masters and earning their loyalty. But in the end, Dracula only serves as an emotional tool to torment one of the coolest characters in gaming history. The Alucard.
You are the Alucard.
The Alucard.
To the Alucard of the castle. Call me Alucard. Know thee.
Son of Dracula and Lisa Tepes, also known as Adrian Fahrenheit Tepes, the tragic prince. He's completely stoic and brooding and dark, and it's totally reasonable for him to be like that. He got beat up by his dad, almost killed in fact, his mom died, he's living a lonely life that basically no one else can relate to, and he feels the burden of honoring his mother's final wishes. He has an alluring character design, and his voice sounds cold and depressed and smooth.
Am I going to have to kill you?
Do you think you can? If you're really a Belmont and not some runt running around with a family crest, you might be able to. Let's find out.
I really like his character, and you know what? He really evolves. He begins opening up over time with Trevor and Sifa as they become a fantastic trio. From making jabs at each other to covering each other's back in battle, they forged a bond of trust and friendship. And together, they have some of the coolest battle scenes in the entire series. But individually, Alucard had the most emotionally tragic battle of all. When he's fighting his dad, he calls him out on all of his action, bringing the truth to him, all while getting wrecked super badly in this fight. And the final scene when Dracula realizes he is killing his own son and only wanting to give Alucard a fatherly hug, that brings so much feels. And that image at the end of young Alucard playing with Lisa and him tearing up, it's like a lament of innocence. Moving to Season 3, we get some interesting development for all the characters. But the main focus of Season 3 is going to be dedicated to Saint Germain, the Forge Masters, and the Vampire Sisters. For the heroic trio, I'll gloss over it pretty quickly. Trevor and Sifa got some really epic battle scenes, and we get to see Trevor rubbing off of Sifa this time. For Alucard, we get to see him become pretty depressed and a bit crazy since Trevor and Sifa left. When he met Taka and Sumi, we get to see him perk up a bit, and it's pretty nice. Poor dude was going insane from the loneliness, and I found it pretty hilarious that he actually made dolls of Trevor and Sifa just to preserve his mental health. Where to start with Saint Germain? He's pretty much a giant mystery box character. He's likable, charming, aloof, and suspicious beyond all belief. Super sus. He's a traveler of the Infinite Corridor, a realm that allows you to travel to other worlds. He uses big words, he name drops random facts from other lands or facts that hasn't happened yet, and overall acts pretty suspicious and peculiar, such as paying for food with a coin that may or may not have existed in that time period yet. And in the end, he jumps back into the Infinite Corridor and leaves as mysteriously as he shows up. The only difference between introducing him and him leaving is that the audience learns that he has a long-lost love in the Infinite Corridor that he's trying to find. So yeah, a big, giant mystery box. And I liked his personality. Not necessarily the plot, but yeah, his personality was fun in Season 3. The Forge Masters. Let's start with Isaac. Dude is basically doing a 180 on his emotional spectrum every 5 minutes. He goes from hating humanity to thinking it isn't too bad, back to hating humanity again, all in the blink of an eye. And now you know what? I'm actually fine with that. He's not the most sociable guy in the world considering he never really talked to humans. Because of that, he really couldn't diffuse any tensions from the situations that arises, especially if he was bringing along his night creatures. I mean, come on. Those things eat human limbs and tower over most people. But his interaction with the relics merchant, the really chill and cool boat captain, and the elderly forge master served to soften his stubborn demeanor and offered an alternative and more hopeful view of the world. That, and he had a wicked cool battle scene with the warlord wizard. It's super tense and well animated, and truly showcases the power of a forge master in the middle of a battle. He may not be super fast or super strong like a vampire, but he definitely has plenty of utility and creativity. And yeah, I really enjoyed Isaac's character and plot development over this season. Now, Hector is an unfortunate person. He's similar to Alucard in that bad stuff just keeps happening to him. First getting deceived by Carmilla, then getting brutalized by her, then was held as a prisoner captive, then forced to live in a dank cell with virtually no edible food, and now Isaac wants to kill him because he thinks he betrayed Dracula. All for what? So Carmilla can use him to create an army of night creatures. I have more things to say about Hector, but I'll get to it later. For now, we move to the final group, the Vampire Sisters. We'll start off with Carmilla, one of the 4 queens of Styria. She's crazy, it's been said before, but yeah, she's absolutely bonkers and crazy, and I love it. She has grandiose plans of conquering a good chunk of Europe, but the way she approaches it with her sisters and to those around her is pretty unhinged. Even her sisters say that she's always scheming. She's clever, ambitious, and highly manipulative, though it's clear to the viewers, not to those being deceived, that she isn't rational half the time. In fact, she's about as stable as the Zimbabwe dollar, and is reliant on her sisters to execute the plans. The rest of the sisters call her out on it too, such as when they observe that Hector doesn't want to help them out. Probably because Carmilla made him walk halfway across the country without a horse and probably shattered at least half a dozen bones. Overall, she's a compelling character with clear weaknesses too. She can't run a country mainly because she'll literally bleed it dry. Instead, she needs her sister to basically hold her back and handle the infrastructure. I think that's a nice touch considering we usually hear stories about a completely insane evil ruler that is coincidentally very good at managing the bureaucracy of a government. Like, how does that even work? You're completely insane and evil. But yeah, her lack of skill at running a country makes it enticing to see how the remaining sisters pick up the slack. Now we turn to Striga and Morana, two important vampire sisters and second and third queen of Styria. Striga handles the military branch of the country while Morana handles the internal logistics. But their storylines are closely intertwined because they're romantically involved with each other. Overall, their plot is pretty simple and I don't have much to say about them, neither good or bad. They help execute Carmilla's plan and are shown to be very capable in their respective departments, and they help correct all the problems about Carmilla's plans. Things like, Striga's troop numbers and Morana's management of supply lines. I appreciate that because it brings a sense of realism to the series. And finally, we come to Best Girl Lenore, the fourth and final queen of Styria, and also the most compassionate of the vampire sisters. Yeah, you heard me. Best Girl. This is a hill I'm gonna make my stand on, alright? Come at me, bro. She's my lady. My queen. Alright? And for good reasons, too. She's a very deceptive character on par with Carmilla's trickery, both to characters in the show and to the viewer. She is first shown to be overly caring with a mild-mannered voice, basically the good girl archetype. Her specialty is diplomacy, so it's implied that she handles the country's external relationships, meaning that, in essence, she's a sweet talker. So, when she was tasked with coercing Hector to basically make an army of night creatures for them, I honestly didn't really expect too much from it. Man, was I wrong. To talk about Lenore, we also have to talk about Hector. Hector's character developed while he was captured. He was tortured, he was beaten senseless, and basically snapped. It doesn't really matter if he was weak and a prisoner and surrounded by an army. He's gonna attempt to escape, alright? And it leads to one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. So while Lenore was sweet-talking him and offering food, he pulled off some smooth combat moves and locked her in a grapple. Yes, our hero Hector is finally gonna have an epic breakout scene.
But you call the guard, tell him to unlock this door, or I will rip your throat out and break your neck. And we'll just see how well you live.
Up until Lenore dropped a good girl act and our boy Hector got folded. Hard. And with that, Hector's situation sunk to new lows. But my adoration and fascination for Lenore skyrocketed to unfathomable heights.
I make peace. And because of that, people think I'm soft. People think I'm weak. You won't make that mistake again, will you?
Yes, Lenore, I won't make that mistake again. The interaction between Lenore and Hector is bewitching to say the least. And Hector closely bonds with Lenore's kindness and companionships over time. It's very human, to be honest, and I really am captivated by it. I mean, think about it. He's alone in a cell with virtually nothing to live for except maybe this vampire girl, who is treating him well. A case of Stockholm Syndrome, yeah, I see it. He was basically following orders from someone else for most of his life, such as Dracula's. And when he finally gets to make his own decision in trying to escape and improve his own situation, he gets completely devastated and smashed. And yeah, maybe he should have learned to not trust vampires. But at this point, his options aren't very good. I mean, he has either don't listen to Lenore and live naked in a dungeon eating maggots, or listen to Lenore and get some berries and fruits and a fresh set of clothes. And what about the infamous episode for Season 3? The scene involving Taka, Sumi, and Alucard on one end, Hector and Lenore on the other end, an epic raging battle with Sifa and Trevor underground on the other end, and Isaac's massive magician battle on the other end. I'll be honest, I personally didn't like the editing. There were 4 massive critical events happening at once, and a constant jump between them felt extremely disorienting. Yes, I get that they were trying to convey the sense of chaos for all 4 events, and try to use these estranged jump cuts to impart that feeling. I still don't like it. When I was getting into the groove of one scene, I get torn out of it and have to reset into another. However, if we ignore the editing, I actually thought the characters were strongly developed and the battle scenes were super well choreographed. I mean, there really isn't much to say except how cool Sifa, Trevor, and Isaac were. Let's give a round of applause for the dual-wielding Trevor in this scene. But yeah, back to characters. Alucard gets horribly betrayed by the humans Taka and Sumi and is left crying. It's a strong implication on Alucard's part whether humanity is worth saving or not because he stakes them in front of the castle. Just like how Dracula staked his enemies in the past. I thought that character development and challenge was really strong, even if Taka and Sumi's betrayal is a bit sudden out of left field. Isaac managed to slay the magician and is now questioning his role in life. Questioning if humans are evil or good and if he should pursue revenge. Basically a layout foundation for the rest of his story. And geez, Hector, he gets toyed around with by Lenore and had a romping fun time. Legitimately a romping fun time, okay? Up until his naiveness accidentally landed him with a magic loyalty ring on his finger, thereby forcing him to obey every single one of Lenore's commands. Oops. I thought this scene was humanistic for Hector, considering the amount of time he spent with Lenore, and I honestly can't blame him one bit. Keep in mind, he doesn't have access to his magical abilities at this point. So yeah, overall I thought Season 3 was great. It didn't hit the highs of Season 2, but it was still a really fantastic season. It helped establish plenty of characters, gave them challenges, and emotionally destroyed most of the main characters. It also gave us the very important mystery box character, Saint Germain, which can be tailored fit to just about any story. And it also gave us the loyalty ring, a magical device that Lenore also gave to the rest of her sisters, which I legit thought was going to play a major role in the future seasons because it seemed like Lenore had some secret ambitions as well. Then Season 4 was released. Look, I enjoyed Season 4 for what it is, okay? But there's no denying that a lot of the character developments and plotlines and logic were thrown into the trash bin, and the trash bin yeeted into the next galaxy. I have a lot of problems with Season 4. But let's start with what's good about Season 4, alright? Isaac's story and character is probably the most well-developed of them all. He ate some berries and chilled out with a night creature. He comes to the conclusion that he was being used as a tool and is now thinking for himself. It appears to be implied that he also thinks that all creatures, no matter if they're humans, vampires, or night creatures, can be either good or bad or somewhere in between. He's not seeing the world in black and white anymore, and that's a satisfying feeling. He showed brilliant battle tactics as he assaulted Carmilla's castle, and learned to let go of revenge when confronting Hector. And that isn't coming out of the blue either. We see him pondering about these things over the course of time, such as with his night creatures and silent monologues. I mean, let's be honest, some of it wasn't the greatest writing.
I killed you, old wizard.
But it's understandable. And overall, I really enjoyed Isaac's character. It's like this.
It felt like repairing the world a little.
Speaking of Carmilla, she was so freaking cool this season. She had a scene with Lenore that showcases her descent into madness. She is shown to be even more ambitious than ever before and wants to conquer everything. And yes, I admit it, her descent did feel rushed, and there was kind of a leap in logic between her wanting to conquering a good chunk of Europe to everything. But it also fits in overall with everything else, with her whole entire theme, so I can't really complain too much. And she legit has the definite best fight scene in the entire series. Can we just talk about how eloquent her fight is with Isaac? It's the only fight scene that feels satisfying from a narrative perspective. Carmilla drops her regalness for raw power, yet she still fights with an air of elegance. And in high heels too. And Isaac started doing the big brain thing, okay? He knows he can't beat Carmilla in a 1v1 fight, so he lets his night creatures weaken her before moving in. And even then, he doesn't fight her 1v1. He brings in other night creatures to try to take her down too. And the animation is so well directed and fluid and well drawn. Everything Carmilla does is vicious and glory. And Isaac is like super precise with his movements because he knows Carmilla will overpower him otherwise. Call me crazy, but I felt a tinge of sadness for Carmilla when she was staring out the windows with those defeated eyes. Kind of like the defeat of a worthy opponent or the loss of a great character. I mean, yeah, I know she's super evil, but it's that feeling when you know this series is actually going to end. And that legendary moment when she stabbed herself and blew a part of the castle, it was breathtaking. It was such a satisfying fight visually and emotionally, and it leaves the series on such a high note. Like, this was the highest high point of the season. Following the Carmilla fight, we have to talk about the other conclusion, Striga and Morana. They had an arc where they began questioning Carmilla. Unlike the previously mentioned characters and arcs, this one felt super sped up like a Formula 1 racing car on Nas. They realized that if they carried through with Carmilla's plan, then they would never ever see each other again. Morana would be forever managing supply lines and internal affairs, while Striga would always be defending the borders from new threats. It's an interesting premise, right? The problem was all this happened in less than half an episode. I would have liked it spread out over a longer period of time, like maybe Morana wanting to talk to Striga about logistics one episode, but then Striga cutting her short saying she needs to be on a battlefield now. Then in other episodes, they had the roles reversed, before they realized that they will never see each other if Carmilla's plan succeeded. What we got wasn't bad, it was just simply okay satisfying. But at least we got a really cool battle sequence with Striga in her sun battle armor. In the end, we get a satisfying conclusion, sort of. They return to the castle to discover it being overrun and they assume Lenore's death, because, giant explosion and Lenore is weaker than Carmilla, which is totally reasonable. They calculated that they don't have enough troops to retake the castle, so they left Styria to rule over their recently conquered far-off lands. They comment that no matter what happens, no matter how much turmoil and changes happens to them, as long as they have each other, they will be alright. It's a nice satisfying conclusion for their story, but yeah, I just kind of wish we saw more of them. You can tell they really dropped their story halfway because, well, they barely had on, 0 scenes. Regardless, these are my highlights of Season 4. The Vampire Sister arcs, and Isaac. You can tell they spent a lot of time and effort setting these characters up and writing out logical conclusions for most of their endings. It almost feels like as if all of Season 4 was supposed to be about the Vampire Sister and Isaac. And now we get into the major problems of Season 4. Starting with Vonnie of London, also known as Death. My biggest problem with him is how he's revealed as Death. He literally kind of just shows up in the last episodes via magic mirror travel and poof, unveils he's Death. The only other mention of Death early on was Trevor's discussion about Death Elementals, which lasted 30 seconds? I mean, it was really weak foreshadowing at most, and the only other foreshadowing we got was when he was having a discussion with Rako not knowing the extent of the world. It feels forced. I mean, visually, Death is really cool, and his boss battle with Trevor is dripping with style. It's just how he was revealed was kind of lame. And speaking of Rako, there were a lot of useless filler characters that ate up so much screen time with their lengthy and pointless dialogue. Primarily 3 characters, Rako, Zamfir, and Greta. I know I'm going to get some flack with Greta, but bear with me. We'll start with Rako.
I am perfect.
No, Rako, you are not perfect. You're useless to the plot and you made things worse. That clip you saw was pretty much his entire contribution to Season 4, besides putting a tracking device on Zamfir, something Varney could have done and helped build up his sorely underdeveloped character. You could remove all scenes with Rako in it, and it wouldn't be a detriment to the overarching story. In fact, you would gain about 12 minutes to be used for the other characters by removing Rako, time that they sorely needed to develop their underutilized plotlines. And Zamfir. I'll admit it, this person had more potential than Rako, but still really sucked. Unlike Rako, it did seem like Zamfir was going to play a bigger role with the destruction or redemption of the noble family, but they quickly abandoned that plotline while in the ruins. Yeah, I get it, they were trying to showcase that Dracula inflicted insanity upon all who saw his fiery visage. But it felt wrong and forced. Instead, it only came to me as a means to deliver magical artifact weapons into Trevor's inventory. And writing out Zamfir would save about 19 minutes that could be spent on other characters as well. And we get to Greta. Yes, she has some cool battle scenes, I'm not going to deny that. But my issue is with how much nonsensical time she's eating up with Alucard, and her poor defense at Dracula's castle. I mean, why not take all the villagers and put them into the castle to begin with? So what's wrong with Greta? To answer that, we have to focus on Alucard. At the beginning of the series, they handled him perfectly fine. Keep in mind, he just killed his father, Trevor and Sifa left him, he was assaulted by people he thought were his friends, then he killed those fake friends, he's been drinking nonstop to forget the pain, and he's been alone for who knows how long. But then, suddenly he has a change of heart and decides to help out a village? Not only that, but he seems to be receptive of Greta's approaches? I don't know about you, I don't know about his vampiric nature, but Alucard is half human, and most humans, as far as I know, would be pretty much closed off to the world if all this stuff happened to Alucard happened to them. Yes, I love the battle scenes, but this entire season it felt like Alucard was either fighting or getting wooed on by Greta. The biggest offender is when Trevor seemingly died and Alucard seems to be content with Greta and the children. For crying out loud, Sifa is in depression. She's in isolation for 2 weeks. If anything, I wanted to see Alucard crying in isolation with Sifa. Imagine this. Imagine if Dumbledore died and Harry Potter was like, oh well, I'm just gonna be happy with Ginny. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It feels forced. It's out of character. The entire season just seemed to drop Alucard's personality, struggles, and plotlines on like 10,000 hydrogen nukes and detonated all of them with a sparkler firework. In exchange for what? In exchange for the rules of cool fights. A trade that was definitely not worth it. It makes him quite literally a tragic character for us. A definite fallen prince, if you will, and not the good kind. And now we can see why I'm not a huge fan of Greta. She's basically an extension character used simply to give Alucard a romantic interest, and is nothing more than a quest escort NPC. Like, you can remove her, and nothing of significant value would be lost. In the end, Alucard's story felt completely unfulfilling and incomplete, despite the amazing setups in seasons 1, 2, and 3. And that sucks! Because Alucard's one of my favorite characters. And Saint Germain. Alright, where do I start? This guy is confusing. The opening scene with Saint Germain and the Alchemist was a giant exposition dump, which is a bad start already. A giant exposition just to turn Saint Germain into a fallen character. Now, if we accept the Alchemist scene as it is, right? How is Saint Germain's storyline? I actually liked the theme of where his plot was heading, but not with the overall quality of it or how it turned out. There's no doubt about it that it feels hyper-rushed like the Star Trek Enterprise going into warp speed. It was serviceable. They showed some scenes of his descent into madness for a one-sided love, so his character doesn't feel completely disjointed. He's a solid tragic character that, unfortunately, had his plotlines on 20 cups of espresso. What about the namesake characters? What about Trevor and Sifa? They literally had no development this entire season. The beginning was good, somewhat. It showed a weekly time lapse as they have relationship problems, normal for most human beings. We get a hilarious scene where Sifa is angry at Trevor and blames him for becoming more and more crude. But after that, there's literally no more development. Yeah, we get some moments where Sifa manages the civilians, but that's pretty much it. And now we come to the titans of offenders in this season. Let's talk about the fight with Death. It's a great fight, okay? It's an amazing, well-animated fight, great choreography, great design, you've heard it all before. The problem I have with this fight are the combatants, namely the lack of combatants. Sifa and Alucard. Like, why would they not help Trevor? They've been established as a trio that always fights together. They've also been established to fly. So, reaching the platform is not an issue. There were no magical barriers impeding their path, and flying debris shouldn't be a problem. Or if it is, they should show the debris preventing them from reaching Trevor. Instead, it kind of just shows them yeeting themselves out of there. If you want to have Trevor have a solo fight with Death, then at least make it reasonable. Have Sifa and Alucard be incapacitated. Have a magic barrier preventing them from entering. I mean, it was established that Alucard couldn't break through the magic barrier. And let's talk about the other big thing that is divided amongst Castlevania fans. Trevor's miraculous survival. Saint Germain opened up the Infinite Corridor to save Trevor at the last possible second. Some people call it a giant Deus Ex Machina and are annoyed at it. Me? I'm kind of annoyed about it, but I'm actually relatively okay with it. Reason why is because I chalk it up to Trevor equipping a bunch of luck equipment and rolling a natural 20 on a critical save. But yeah, I get it. From a story point of view, it's pretty blasphemous. But it's not as blasphemous as the last episode. Look, a lot of people really like the last episode. It has its good points, it has its bad points. But you can't say that Dracula being insta-resurrected with Lisa is good writing. I get that people wanted them to have a happy ending. I get that they wanted to have Dracula not be a future bad guy in future stories. But literally, the final scene of the series is so completely disjointed from everything else that it felt like one of those whirly-gig spinner roller coaster rides. They woke up with no memories in the field. Just think about that for a second and let that sink in. But nothing is as awful and as sacrilegious as Lenore's story arc ending. Yes, I am this right now. I am livid. And I'm going to be defending this, alright? Hear me out. It goes against every single bit of her character personality and development to freaking sunwalk at the end. Why would she do that? Why didn't Hector stop her? Hector was shown to flip heads over toes and bend backwards to ensure Lenore's safety during Isaac's attack on Carmilla's castle.
This one stays safe with me.
And it was established in so many scenes that he was beginning to grow on Lenore and vice versa. Yes, I know he went from
My life is over.
to chillaxing in the castle in a very, very rushed fashion. But Hector falling for Lenore is kind of his thing. So at the end, why wouldn't Hector try and stop her from sunwalking? It makes no sense. Let's look at it this way, okay? If your friend was going to do something dumb, say walk blindly onto the freeway during rush hour traffic because they felt like their life was pointless or some other existential crisis, would you stop them? Yeah, you would. It's a complete destruction of Hector's character because he does a 180 on his actions. And speaking of Lenore, she had her character arc completely and utterly destroyed in this last scene. She was established to be a cunning and tricky individual. She seemed to be just as scheming as Carmilla, and those loyalty rings were definitely a setup for something. Her core personality just doesn't lend itself for a sunwalk. She wasn't shown to have unstable thoughts, or confidence issues, or depression at any point in the series. The most unstable thing the viewer gets from her is the feeling of betrayal by Carmilla. So, I ask you again, why would she sunwalk? Let's go over her claims to sunwalk one at a time. She felt trapped in a cage. This cage can either be physical or metaphorical. If this cage is physical, such as being unable to leave the castle because of Isaac watching her 24/7, then we have a couple of options. So the answer to this cage problem is simple. Just outlive Isaac. You're a vampire. You don't age. Alright, let's assume Isaac doesn't age. Well, you have so many tools to escape that is naturally built into your vampiric blood. You have mist form and bat form. Maybe at night you can just fly away. I doubt the night creatures will be able to tag you since you're not a normal vampire. You're a Carmilla type vampire. Okay, let's say Lenore can't escape for some reason because she can't turn into a magic cloud. You know what Lenore does really well?
Diplomacy is compromise.
So why not use your negotiations and diplomacy skills to talk to Isaac? Think, Lenore, think. Isaac's new nation would have use for a skilled negotiator with other countries too, so you can definitely leverage that, Lenore. It's just a cop-out to say that she feels trapped in a physical cage when there are plenty of options for her to remove said cage. Now, what if the cage she mentioned is a metaphorical one? Then we have to look at the reasonings for the metaphorical cage. Lenore claims that vampiric nature will eventually seek power. This power is unsustainable and will destroy everything in sight, thereby disrupting stability. A vampiric nature also clings to stability and cannot handle change. Therefore, it creates an uneasy paradox, and Lenore feels she is caged by her vampiric nature. First things first, Lenore. You've been drinking a lot. Put the wine glass down and sleep on it for a few days. You'll realize how inane your logic sounds. It's specific vampires that go mad with power. Yes, we can use other vampires to illustrate this point, such as Godbrand only wanting to do Viking stuff, or Alucard honoring Lisa's final wishes and handling massive amounts of changes. But Lenore doesn't know them, so she can't draw upon their experiences. But you know who else we can use as an example? Lenore's sister, Morana. Morana has been around for ages. In fact, digging into this, I learned that Morana is actually older than Carmilla herself. And sure, Morana was stated to be cruel to prisoners and such, but she wasn't power-hungry nor destructive. Striga too. Being the vampire sisters, you spend a considerable amount of time with each other and care for each other. And yes, while Lenore doesn't know the final ending for Morana and Striga, therefore she doesn't know that they apparently rejected power, she can't assume they are dead either. Striga was shown to be a very capable general in her own right and wasn't stationed at the castle when the invasion happened. Morana was also at Striga's side, and Lenore knows that Striga is a capable general. So logically, Lenore should have recognized this and lived to seek out her remaining sisters, or at least get confirmation if they are alive or deceased. Since the argument of vampiric nature is rooted in philosophy and she seems to be frightened by it, why not discuss it with someone who traveled the world, like Isaac? Or look into writings from the massive castle library, the one with vampire philosophy and development.
I admit there seems to be more depth to what would you call it? Vampire culture, that I thought. There are ideas in here about physical presence in the world, the importance of soil and landscape and being. I mean, actual philosophy. Amazing.
Hector may have provoked the sun-walking thought, but Hector isn't a full-path Mass Effect renegade character.
There's still one way to stop this. If you've got the guts.
Goodbye, Shepard.
He'd be willing to stop Lenore's sunwalk and help figure out this confusing time for her. In short, the metaphorical cage has so many flaws that it might as well not exist. It is supposedly imposed by her vampiric nature and Lenore's mind, but as demonstrated, there's plenty of counterpoints. Counterpoints that Lenore has experienced and brought up before in the past season. Counterpoints that has rendered this metaphorical cage non-existent. So then, what metaphorical cage is Lenore trapped in? It's a travesty for Lenore's arc. If Alucard's character destruction is 10,000 hydrogen nukes going off, then Lenore's character destruction is 20,000 suns going supernova. Lenore was one of my favorite characters. She was a compelling and beautiful character, only for Season 4 to completely rip that away in the most cursed way possible, and it left me in tragic, bloody tears. It seems like there are going to be at least 2 more seasons based on how they set up Season 3, but due to an abrupt cancellation, they had to quickly compress everyone's plotline and wrap up the series. If I had to guess, Season 4 was going to be dedicated to the Vampire Sisters, and Season 5 would be dedicated to Death. With that in mind, I enjoyed what I got for Season 4, but I still feel a sense of disappointment with the season. It's like an undercooked and soggy, ill-prepared hamburger from a Michelin-starred restaurant that's about to go bankrupt. But Castlevania suffered from the afflicted cancellation curse. They only had 4 seasons, with one of them apparently being rushed due to internal complications. It didn't help that 2020 happened either. So I appreciate Season 4 for what it is. But the pain still stings as I make this review. It got Game of Thrones. Is Castlevania a good series? It's more than a good series. It's a great series with gorgeous art, fantastic characters, riveting drama, and stellar action scenes. Unfortunately, Castlevania suffered from a curse. A curse in the form of last-minute cancellation in 2020. Though scarred from this affliction, the entire series' innate qualities were enough to be the shining sun that vanquished its own horrible night. And if you like this review, whip that like button, put a loyalty ring on, and subscribe to the channel. And if you watch the series, comment below your thoughts on the show's final season. Or, put in the comment that Lenore is best girl, because we all know that Lenore is the best girl. If not, go watch it and come back and comment then. Until next time, I will see you around. Take care, folks.
There. Good boy.
Nice!